We are doing lesson number 4 in the quarterly, the book of Job, and the title this week is God and Human Suffering. God and Human Suffering. And I just brought this book to recommend for those who would like a very scholarly work on the whole question about God and human suffering. It's God of Sense and Traditions of and Traditions of Nonsense by Sigve Tonstad. It's very well done, very scholarly. If you'd like a book, I just want to recommend that to you. Sigve is a Seventh-day Adventist physician and MD, and he's got a degree in biblical languages, and so he's a very, very thoughtful person. So the title of the lesson, as you look at the title, God and Human Suffering, have you ever had questions as you've experienced or seen human suffering? Have you ever had to answer someone else's questions who was questioning the existence or the trustworthiness of God because of human suffering? If you jump into Tuesday's lesson, we're going to jump over to Tuesday because I want that first paragraph. And you look at that first paragraph, it says, despite the hype of those who don't believe in God, those who believe in God have many good reasons for their belief. However, there's been one perennial problem that many have used through the ages to justify their disbelief. And that is the problem of human suffering and evil. How can God be all good, all loving, all powerful, and evil exist? This has been and remains a stumbling block to many. And also, if we are honest, what believer in God, what person who has tasted and experienced the reality of God and His love hasn't struggled at times with that question? And so I thought maybe we just throw out some types of things that sometimes people struggle with. I have patients in my office and struggle with. A drunk driver runs across the line and hits an 18-year-old, and the 18-year-old dies, and the drunk driver survives. Why didn't God use His power to save the teen? 2 people have cancer. One survives, the other doesn't. And the one who survives is the one who wasn't being prayed for. The one who dies is the one who's being prayed for. Ever happen? Cause questions. Does God love one more than the other? Have you ever had a critic, the skeptic of God, bring up as evidence things like this? And even worse, child abuse, wars, famine, human suffering, as evidence there is no God. Perhaps the classic argument was presented by Epicurus 300 years before Christ with these questions, and I'll read a paragraph from Epicurus. Is God willing to prevent evil but unable to do so? In that case, God is not omnipotent. Is God able to prevent evil but unwilling to do so? If so, God must be malevolent. If God is both willing and able to prevent evil, then why is there evil in the world? This is a classic logic argument by Epicurus, and it still persists today. Many who reject the idea of God reject it based on this type of thinking. Epicurus went on to write, God is either willing to remove evil and cannot, or He can and is unwilling. Or He is neither willing nor able to do so, or else He is both willing and able. If He is willing and not able, He must be weak, which cannot be affirmed of God. If He is able and not willing, He must be envious, which is also contrary to the nature of God. If He is neither willing nor able, He must be both envious and weak, and consequently not be God. If He is both willing and able, the only possibility that agrees with the nature of God, then where does evil come from? Or why does He not eliminate it? How do you answer such questions? What do you say to the critic who raises these questions to you? Do you have an answer that is compelling? Or do you give the answer Martin Luther, the great reformer, would have given? This is Martin Luther. This is the highest degree of faith, to believe Him God, merciful, when He saves so few and damns so many. And to believe Him righteous when by His own will He makes us necessarily damnable, so that He seems, according to Erasmus, to delight in the torments of the wretched and to be worthy of hatred rather than love. If then I could by any means comprehend how this God can be merciful and just, who displays so much wrath and iniquity, there would be no need of faith. That's Martin Luther, the great reformer. Do you hear Luther's position? What is Luther's position on how we answer the question of the critic on why a God who's all-powerful and all good permits evil? What's his answer?
Just believe without thinking.
That's Luther's answer. We just take that on faith. If we could understand it, then we wouldn't need faith. And so we're required to believe that God is good in the face of the evidence that he's evil. And that's a measure of faith. This is Luther's position. Do you know that Luther's position is held by a majority of Christians today? Or at least many? And many that hold to a certain theological perspective love this idea. Faith is believing when you know it ain't so.
Tim, I can't quite get there with that, because I'm thinking that what you're going through right now is rhetoric. And that's where I would stop the person who had all these arguments about God being, if he's all good or all willing and all that, and why doesn't he do it? It's like, it's not either or, and yet debaters and people who love rhetoric.
But it's not rhetoric. Are you saying that suffering is rhetoric? Are you saying there's no real evil in the world? There's no real suffering in the world?
Of course not.
So that's the argument. There is real suffering in the world, and you claim that God is good and that God's all-powerful. So how do you explain an all-powerful good God allowing such horrible evil in the world?
How do you explain there being 31 chapters in Job when you could say it in one? That's the way I come back at people like that.
But okay, so is the answer, how do you explain 31 chapters in Job compelling to somebody who's the critic? Oh, well, I believe now. You've got me. I don't think that persuades.
Well, let's just start.
But we're going to persuade today. Trust me, we're going to persuade today. I'm presenting to you the concerns that are common, and I'm challenging you to process. How do you answer? We have answers. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, the way I think of it, the way I've actually approached people with it, is that to present to them the God they think God is, which is a puppet God, a puppeteer. Would you really want a God who forces you to behave even if you don't want to? Well, you're asking that God to be a puppeteer for the entire world, to make us behave whatever we choose. And yet what he has done is make creations with powers and then gives them the freedom to use it.
Oh, I like where you're going with that. Now you're actually bringing a new level, and that's the question. What are the elements, if you heard Epicurus' argument, you heard Martin Luther's response, what are the elements that are critical to really understanding that Martin Luther don't and Epicurus don't have? What elements are they missing?
The great controversy.
The great controversy they're missing, true, that's true. Over what?
The presence of evil.
The presence of evil.
Character. And freedom.
What's the core? What's the root?
The character of God.
Character of God.
And free will.
Free will. Okay, I like where you're going with both of those. What do we emphasize in here for the last several years? The real root, and it's connected directly to the character of God and free will. They're both connected, so it's not either or. It's not that those are wrong answers. Those are absolutely right answers. They don't understand God's law. They're operating and they're trying to answer these questions through the lens on how human beings deal with it, on how we deal with reality. That's what they're trying to do. They don't understand design parameters on which reality actually is constructed and built to operate. And we're going to really unpack this throughout the lesson today. First, we're going to talk about the spiritual design parameters, then we'll talk about physical design parameters.